Cisgender, what the heck does it mean? If you want to know the science and terminology as well as the historical implications of the term cisgender, then this video is for you, so get comfortable because this is going to be probably the deepest dive you've ever seen. Let's discover the history of the word and the implications on society, and also talk a little bit about the cisgender versus biological debate, all while replying to comments that I've gotten in the past on my channel. So in November last year, I made a video using my 1970 great-great-grandma's dictionary and defined the term cisgender by combining the term cis and gender at face value. But today we're going to go quite a bit deeper than that. The term cis, as explored in that video, is considered a root word, just like the term trans. Now typically, trans is either rooted with one of three of these options. Either man, male, or boy, girl, female, or woman. Or speaking in general, it's trans person or trans people. And typically adding the term gender to the end of trans implies that this person is transitioning from one gender to the other. But this term also correlates with people who don't have surgeries or don't have hormones to align their gender to what they would like it to be. Because the term both involves people who aren't transitioning and people who are transitioning. And just so we get this out of the way, according to my 1970 dictionary, the terms gender and sex, while some parts of the definitions that you would see in there are what you would think for the era, 2. The character of being male or female. There are a few lines that do correlate more of what you would think would be applied now. In most Indo-European languages, and in others, gender is not necessarily correlated with sex. To start things out, we'll define cis. Cis, pronounced cis. It is derived of Latin roots, 1, on this side of, or 2, subsequent to. Subsequent. It's to follow close after, coming after, following in time, place, or order. Now, some people on my videos have said this as a comment. Cisgender is just a term that was created in the early 90s to make non-trans people sound weird and silly. While this is partially true, the term cisgender originally came into a compound word in the early 90s in chat rooms. It wasn't until the year 2007, about 19 years ago, when it was published in the book Whipping Girl by the author Julia Serano, who is a trans woman herself. Here's the selection where it was first said, so please pause it if you want to read it. Now, the first time the term cisgender was included as one word was in 2015. Although the term and definition of cis goes back all the way back to ancient Rome in terms of geography and Latin and roots, having found all these terms in a Latin dictionary. And then when we turn to biology and chemistry, we see the term cis a lot as well. And as you can see, the terms cis and trans are both used very commonly in the same sentence or same terminology in the definitions of biological or chemistry relations. And then in 1910, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was one of the pioneers of modern transgender surgeries, who was then later in the 1930s murdered by the likes of Adolf Hitler's regime, along with his entire library of books about being a transsexual and the science around that. That's a term they used at the time. Don't attack me for saying that word. In 1910, he released a book called This, and it's translated to The Transvestites, the erotic drive to cross-dress, of which in modern terms we use the term in parts, of which he went into how being a transvestite or a transsexual is very different from being someone who is gay or cross-dresses. And then in 1914, another sexologist similar to the likes of Magnus Hirschfeld, named Ernst Burchard. Translated to English, it's the encyclopedia of the entire sexual life. In this book, we see the first term of CISVESTITISMUS, or translated to English, it's CISVESTITISM, the inclination to put on the clothing of another age group, social class, or profession of the same sex for the purpose of sexual relaxation related to transvestitism, is mentioned just 3 times in this text, 2 of them in this selection here. CISVESTITISMUS is the earliest form of the term cisgender that we have available, and now 112 years later after this term was coined, and 106 years after Ernst Burchard's death in 1920, which is, by the way, the same age as my great-great-aunt, who is 105 and a half now. She was born December 1920. Now, one of the most important things that you need to gain from this video is that just because the term wasn't coined up to a certain point, doesn't make them any less valid. And it doesn't make what the term defines as these people not exist. Much like I didn't have the term transgender to go off in middle school or high school. If I had access to that term in the mid-2000s and early 2010s, I might have very well been able to transition much sooner. And many of our trans adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even 70s or 80s, did not have the terminology when they were younger. And while transgender people have existed in every single culture, civilization, city, since the beginning of time, regardless if it's something that is sought to be eliminated or destroyed, the fact regardless remains that trans people have always existed. And so have gay, lesbian, bisexual, intersex people, as well as everything included in the plus. That's enough history for today, so let's go back to the 21st century, or more rather, a quarter into the 21st century. Let's look into the cultural reasons of why it seems that a majority of people who use the term cis are trans. Why is that? That statement does seem to ring true in ways. Because while I've heard the term cisgender being used a lot more in trans spaces, as well as in ally spaces, it doesn't seem that this term is used a lot with people who don't follow transgender, lesbian, bisexual, intersex, and so on history. It's also used a lot by people who are considered to be chronically online. And a good chunk of people who are considered politically conservative, voted Republican, strict churchgoers. It seems like a good chunk of people who are on the right politically have a huge problem with the term cisgender and prefer the term biological. And some even doubt the belief of transgender people even existing, stating that we're just made up people just like the term cisgender. And I've even gotten comments from people who are stating that they believe that cis or cisgender is a slur. But in the same sentence, they'll just casually call me a tranny or a or call someone who has disabilities or is just not in line with their political or beliefs and call them a retard, including and up to the term make asylums great again. And not specifically for people who have developmental or some disability of some sort, but for trans people. Even if it's just someone who has unnatural hair colors or people who have a septum ring and they just say septum ring theory rings true again. That's gross, by the way. And now for another important thought. There are quite a few people, it seems, that are inside the transgender community that mainly associate and hang out and feel comfortable around trans or gay people. Their primary circle of friends, relationships, co-workers, clubs, or organizations are essentially gender-themed. And these clubs, organizations, or relationships use the term cisgender as a very common and used word. And as we dove into earlier, the term cis is not a new word by any means. And it's definitely not a made-up word. To people in the transgender community, such as myself, the term transgender and cisgender are normal words. They are words we use to describe different kinds of people. And because it has been used in our culture and in our spaces, the term cisgender has evolved into natural language. And while language has always been changing throughout the entirety of our existence, and it's just become a part of speech at this point. Perhaps there'll be a term that's used for hundreds and hundreds of years, for our lifetimes. Perhaps it's not used for another 10 years. And English and other languages are just so amazing when it comes to this. Because it might just be a buzz term, or it could be considered a it term for certain generations of this earth. For Gen Z, it's terms like sus, cap, unk. And now moving on to our final point for this question in this comment. Why not women and men and trans women and trans men? For this answer, let's combine all the talking points that we've had so far in this video. Let's consider the very, very ancient history of the term cis, including modern use of geography, biology, and chemistry. And then the coin definition of the early 20th century. Let's take the relation to modern language and how language evolves according to the people who use the terms, in certain spaces especially, and how people who were considered transgender by modern examples, regardless of if the term was around at the time, who in the past didn't quite have a term to go off of. Now let's add on just one more thing. In a modern world where it does seem like there are more transgender people than there were in the decades and centuries before, while the number of us is about 1% globally, which is about 82 million of us out of the 8.2 billion, the number 82 million is regardless a gigantic number. And while amazing 1% of the entire world population doesn't seem like a lot, it's a gigantic number. Huge. With the history, implications, and language that went into defining the term cisgender, it has just turned into a large form of English and terminology. And now let's discuss the cisgender versus biological debate. A solid portion of politically conservative Republican voting, the term that they tend to stand behind is the term biological rather than cisgender, and specifically using the terms biological men to address transgender women, or biological women to transgender men. In terms of social features, myself, a trans person, or any other trans people have never heard or associated biological people who are men, who are male, who have the right chromosomes, everything and anything, and identify as men, where boys have always been male, referred to as a biological man. That term biological man has always been, in the past couple years, reserved for transgender women. And I feel that by using language that is reserved to biological sex as compared to gender identity is something that I believe is being used to reduce our power, which plays a huge part in the act of dehumanization. Generally, people who are transgender are very aware of their own biology and they know of their reproduction means. We know what genitals we have and we know what we can do with them. We're not denying our biology by any means. Adversely, we're altering our internal and external characteristics to match the heart, brain, essence, our soul that we all know to be true of ourselves. We know exactly who we are and we are putting in the work to make that happen for us. In recent years, I've heard the terms born female, born a girl from the start, as well as saying normal women or real women. And by doing so, they are assigning trans women as fake women or not real women, as posers, cosplaying women, portraying women, or simply saying men portraying women or pretending to be women, in order to not say the term transgender women. And also there's the point that by saying trans women, trans men, and women and men who are not a binary trans woman or binary trans man, including non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer, all the people who are not male, female, trans woman, or trans man. And by using these set terms, it erases that portion of people. And then there's also the fact that saying trans men and trans women and men and women is 4 words versus 2. I feel that having 2 words instead of several is better than describing every single part of a single person. And so, gals, guys, and everybody in between, that was the all-encompassing, historical, language-abiding, as well as extremely deep dive on the term of cisgender and the root word cis. Why the term cis isn't a slur, no matter how much you want it to be, and how the term just isn't new in any way, shape, or form, giving every single angle to every doubter, as well as the trans isn't even a thing, people. A video that I've been looking forward to making for a very long time. As a 30-year-old transgender woman in the year 2026, who's been out for 11 years since 2015, when I was 19 years old. I'm Andrea, also known as Trans Girl Meets World on both YouTube and TikTok. If you're interested in seeing more of my videos, click the follow button there or subscribe down below on YouTube. It would mean the world if you liked this, shared this on Facebook, or left a comment, anything to get the message out of me and my experiences and conundrum of everything that's going on in the world right now. Have an absolutely amazing rest of your day and week. And remember that you are 100% valid, you are real, and you are loved. If there's no person in your life giving you those things, I'll be that person for you. I love you and I support you. Until next time, keep it casually authentic. Love, Andrea.